imagine that you have a problem, and then imagine that you want a solution. And imagine that there's a particular solution to that particular problem. But then imagine that you have what you might describe as a bigger problem, and that's not the problem. It's the fact that you have problems, because that's the real problem. The real problem is the fact that you have problems. And then you might say, well, you don't want a solution to a problem. You want a solution to the fact that you have problems. And so it's a leap of abstraction, right? So then you might say, well, is there a way of conceptualizing the set of all problems that's universal? And I think there is. I mean, that's what religious stories try to do. And they do it using dramatic means, because the problem is so complex, so that's the meta problem. It's so complex that we don't really know how to formulate it. But that's what we're struggling towards. So it's like, well, what's the problem of life? Something like that. Well, you could say that the problem of life, and I outlined this quite carefully in 12 Rules for Life. The problem of life is this. We're finite and mortal. That's problem number one. So the first problem is that life is essentially tragic. It's little us against infinity. Yeah. And we lose. And not only do we lose, but we lose in a manner that produces a substantial amount of suffering, and sometimes an unbearable amount. So it's a big problem. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is that that's not the worst problem. The worst problem is that that's true, plus malevolence exists in the world, evil exists in the world, and makes that first problem even worse than it would have to be. And that's universally true for everyone all the time. That's archetypal. So when you formulate a situation archetypally, you speak about it in a manner that's eternally true. So there's lots of ways that you and I differ, but there's many ways that we're the same. That would be what constitutes our essential humanity, let's say. And what makes us the same is that, like you, I'm mortal, and my life is finite, and my existence is characterized by suffering, and I have to contend with the fact of malevolence in the world. It's the terribly destructive character of the natural world, it's the tyrannical element of the social world, and it's the adversarial element of myself and every other individual. That's the malevolent element. And so we're stuck with that. Okay, fine. That's the archetypal formulation of the problem. You could say that's the mythic landscape, right? And it's something like good and evil in a world of chaos and order. It's something like that. It's very interesting. You know, there are games online that have that as their basic structure, right? The game developers have figured this out. So that's pretty interesting. Okay, so then the question is, well, how do you comport yourself in a landscape of chaos and order, and when the game is good versus evil? Well, then that's where the idea of the archetypal hero emerges. And the archetypal hero is the person whose eyes are open and whose speech is true, and who faces both the chaos of the unknown and the tyranny of the known and balances them. That's the antidote to the problem. That's the meta solution to the meta problem. It's a very complex problem. There isn't a solution. But the solution to a very complex problem is you should be a better person than you are, because then you'd be better at solving complex problems. And lots of them are coming your way. So bloody well get your act together. You're not who you could be. You know, get your bloody act together. You're whining away in the corner, and you're no good to yourself and anyone else. You know, it's harsh. But then there's another element to that, which is there's way more to you than you think you are, and that you have something necessary and vital to contribute to the world. And if you don't contribute it, that things will happen that aren't good, and that's terrible for you and everyone else. So it's not only that you need to do this because it's your responsibility, but you need to understand that there isn't anything better that you could do for yourself or for anyone else. Yeah. And people are dying to hear that message. Yeah.